It was October 31st, Halloween night, and the streets of New York City were filled with kids and parents, everyone buzzing with excitement. The air had that crisp chill of autumn, and you could hear laughter, excited chatter, and the crinkling of candy wrappers. My best friend Steve and I were dressed up. Steve was a vampire with fake blood dripping from his mouth, and I was a skeleton with white paint smeared on my face. We were 10 years old, just old enough to trick or treat without our parents hovering. Nearby, we'd hit up a few houses on our block and scored a pretty good stash of candy. When we decided to head over to another street, it was darker there, but we didn't mind. We'd always been told to stay where there were lots of people. But tonight was Halloween. It felt like the rules didn't apply. The further we went, the fewer trick-or-treaters we saw, and the night got a little quieter, except for the occasional rustle of leaves underfoot. As we were walking down the sidewalk, I felt this weird sensation, like someone was watching us. I looked over my shoulder, expecting to see some other kids behind us, but there wasn't anyone there, just empty shadows stretching along the pavement under the street lights. I brushed it off, thinking I was just being jumpy because of the spooky atmosphere. But a few minutes later, I saw him, the man on the bike. At first, he was just a shadow at the edge of the street, riding slowly behind us. He wasn't wearing a costume, just a hoodie with the hood pulled low over his face. His bike had one of those creaky chains, so it rattled every time he pedaled. I nudged Steve, pointing him out. Steve just shrugged, saying it was probably nothing. But as we kept walking, the biker kept getting closer, matching our pace, like he was trying to blend in with the rhythm of our steps. We sped up, our feet crunching faster on the sidewalk. But he sped up too, his bike rattling louder as he followed us down the dim street. I was about to tell Steve we should head back when I noticed another figure. This one was walking, and he was on the other side of the street, keeping pace with us, just like the biker. He didn't look like any kid or parent out trick-or-treating. He was tall, dressed in dark clothes, and he was staring straight ahead, walking in step with us, never looking over, never slowing down. These two men weren't just passing by, they were following us. I felt my throat go dry, and my hands clenched tight around my candy bag. Steve, I think we should go, I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady, but Steve didn't respond. He was already staring at the biker, his face pale, his eyes wide. Then it happened. In one swift, terrible motion, the man on the bike veered toward us, closing the gap. In seconds, he grabbed Steve by the arm, jerking him so hard that his bag of candy flew to the ground, spilling chocolate bars and lollipops all over the sidewalk. Steve screamed, thrashing against the man's grip, but the biker's fingers were locked around his arm like iron. I was frozen for a moment, my feet glued to the pavement, as I watched the scene unfold in front of me. Steve was yelling, calling for help, his voice breaking, and I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed with fear. But then something snapped inside me, and I started screaming, too louder than I'd ever screamed in my life. Help, someone please help us, I yelled, my voice echoing down the empty street. Panic took over, and I kept screaming, my throat raw, hoping someone would hear. A porch light flicked on in the distance, and a man stepped out of his house, squinting at the scene unfolding on his street. He saw the biker and the man walking toward us, and didn't hesitate. He ran down his steps, shouting at the men to get away from us. The biker, startled, released Steve and jumped back on his bike, pedaling off into the darkness. The other man, the one who had been walking, stopped dead in his tracks, his face hidden in shadow, before turning around and slipping into the night. The man from the house came over, his face full of worry. He asked if we were okay, and I could barely speak, my chest still heaving with fear. Steve was shaking, his face pale as a ghost. I managed to tell the man what had happened, choking out the words between gasps. He nodded, his face dark with anger, and quickly pulled out his phone to call the police. The police arrived not long after, asking us questions and trying to get descriptions of the men. But in the dark, with the Halloween costumes and shadows, everything had been a blur. They assured us they'd keep an eye out, and I remember the officer's voice was calm, but his eyes were serious, like he knew this wasn't just some Halloween prank. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the memory of those men following us, their cold, empty stares, the iron grip of the biker as he pulled Steve away. It was like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Steve's face, his terrified expression, and the shadows stretching across the sidewalk as the men followed us. Then a few days later, the news broke. The police had caught a gang of kidnappers who had been targeting kids in the area. They found several missing children, scared but safe, hidden away in different locations around the city. To this day, Halloween doesn't feel the same. The costumes, the candy, the laughter of kids on the street, it all seems a little darker, a little more dangerous. Before we get into the next story, if you come for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share these stories with your friends and family. Thanks. It was October 8th, 2012. I was 29 years old. I had just started working at an ancient movie theater on the Oregon coast. I had wanted to work in a movie theater Since I was young, even though it had this dank and unsettling feeling, I just shook it off as a cool, nostalgic place. Working at a movie theater meant working late, and it made me laugh. When other employees would ask for the opening shift recently, I was given the responsibility of building the films back. Then the movies came in 35mm format, often in 4 different reels. It was not easy work to put them together. We had an upstairs that we called the booth, where we had 6 projectors, nothing digital in this theater. I usually started by gathering all the tags, the film cutter, and every other tiny detail needed to be ready. If you didn't put the film together correctly, you'd likely watch the start of a movie in the middle or miss the end. My responsibility was to do a full quality check after building the film, and I got paid to watch the entire movie. If I was the one who built it by the time I finished building the movie, it was around midnight. My boss trusted me enough to be alone in the theater. After she left, I spent about another 45 minutes moving the reels onto a plate for viewing. Bear in mind that these reels could weigh up to 300 pounds, and I'm not that big of a guy. After MacGyvering this thing, I felt a tiny shiver. Trust me, at night with the lights turned off, this place could be terrifying with the old building making noises. I decided to check all the exit doors and entrances, as I had heard stories about previous employees encountering homeless people walking in at night. Everything was locked up tight. The movie I was previewing that night was Sinister with Ethan Hawke. All I knew about the film was that it was a horror movie. I had watched plenty of horror movies in that theater by myself. At this time, I threaded the film, which was extremely technical, and hurried down so I wouldn't miss the trailers. After about 10 minutes, I started feeling very cold. This was quite an old theater with a really poor HVAC system. I distinctly remember turning up the heat, knowing it was the only theater where the HVAC unit worked. I went upstairs to check quickly, and it showed that the heat was on. Instead of fiddling with it, I just took out the batteries and turned it off. I'd rather be somewhat cold than very cold because of the weather outside. After half an hour of the film, I realized there was still cold air, not just blowing on me, but around me. I shrugged it off and continued watching. This is where I encountered the 3 spirits in this building. If you've seen the movie Sinister, you will recognize this. Part 1 was at the horrifying scene where the whole family is tied up on the lawn and a lawn mower goes over each of their heads. The auditorium suddenly had this vapor of dread. It felt like it was underneath the seats moving. I don't spook easily, and I have many other stories, not just about this theater, but many other spots throughout the coast. I just brushed it off, thinking the movie was scaring me. After about 20 minutes, in my peripheral vision to my right, I noticed someone was there. I snapped my head to that area, and as clear as day, a woman in her 30s was staring at me. She was wearing a white, somewhat patterned dress that went down to her ankles. I couldn't see her face or hands, as the theater was still pretty dark. The one thing I saw was unmistakable. She was smiling at me. After about 3 seconds, she turned to her right and disappeared through the entrance doors. I jumped in terror out of my seat, the movie still playing with intense music, and screaming. I started scrambling through the aisle. I liked sitting in the center. When I was alone watching a movie, it got even colder, and the air above my head felt like I couldn't feel it. I ran up the aisle, and my legs started feeling wobbly. Outside the auditorium was an exit on the left-hand side. I threw myself into the guide bar, feeling the late-night breeze absorbing the sweat from my brow. The backside of the theater was wide open with forestry behind it. I went about 200 feet and sat on the sidewalk. Words couldn't describe the whirlwind of fear, confusion, and raw dread that consumed me. The most terrifying part was the realization that I had to go back inside, as everyone else at the theater would say. I had to put the babies to sleep, which meant a daunting journey through the darkened theater to reach the upstairs booth. During my first 2 weeks at the theater, ex-employees had cryptically warned me about encountering the 3 demons that haunted the place. They spoke of a demon lurking in the booth room upstairs, another invisible demon leaving mysterious footprints in the sand, and a third specter wandering the aisles outside the auditorium, occasionally venturing inside. Despite my experience with ghostly encounters, the story still sent shivers down my spine. Summoning all my courage, I forced myself to stand up and make my way back into the theater. Each step felt awkward and hesitant, like a condemned man walking towards his fate. As I cautiously pushed open the door and re-entered the dimly lit halls, the air felt heavy with an eerie stillness. But the initial sense of paranoia began to subside. Upon reaching the projector room, I swiftly shut down all but one of the projectors. As I approached the 6th projector, knowing one of the demons was said to linger in that area, I hesitantly flicked on the light. To my relief, there was no one there, but as I glanced at the port glass where the film was projected onto the screen, a chilling reflection caught my eye. The face that stared back at me was the embodiment of evil, worn, sunken eyes and a thin mustache. The sheer terror I felt at that moment propelled me to flee through the darkened booth, racing down the stairs And through the lobby as I reached the entrance and locked up the building, a sense of relief washed over me. But as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease looking back at the theater. I noticed a window in Theater 6, where I had left the light on. To my horror, the window was now open, adding a final touch of dread to my already harrowing experience. Despite this terrifying encounter, I continued to work at the theater for many more years, encountering numerous other chilling experiences. Perhaps one day I will share more of these unsettling tales with you. I never thought I'd tell this story. People say that time heals, that memories fade, but some memories stick to you like a burr in your mind, refusing to let go. For me, it's what happened on Halloween night 5 years ago. It's the memory of what happened to Jake. Jake was one of my closest friends. We grew up together, went to the same schools, got in the same kinds of trouble. He was the kind of friend you could count on for anything, the kind of friend who'd help you hide a body, and I mean that almost literally, because he had a way of making even the darkest situations seem like a joke. Jake wasn't scared of anything, or at least that's what I thought. That Halloween, we were all excited. Our friend Mark had inherited this old house on the edge of town after his grandparents passed. It was the kind of place you hear stories about, creaky, abandoned for years, with paint peeling off and windows that looked out like empty eyes. Mark decided he'd host a Halloween party there. Come dressed to scare, he'd said. Laughing, I didn't realize how much we'd regret those words. The night started normally enough. A bunch of us crammed into the dusty rooms dressed as vampires, zombies, and ghosts. The house was filled with fake cobwebs, cheap plastic decorations, and whatever horror props Mark could find. We laughed, told stories, drank too much. The house was alive with energy, even though everything around it was so quiet and dead. As the night wore on, the lights flickered. I thought it was just bad wiring. This place hadn't had anyone living in it for years after all. But every time the lights dimmed, we felt a strange chill, the kind of cold that doesn't feel right, not the autumn air, but something unnatural pressing in on us. At some point, Mark thought it would be funny to dare everyone to play a game of hide and seek, even though we were all grown. Jake, ever the daredevil, loved the idea. You'll never find me, he taunted with a grin, disappearing into the dark halls before anyone could count to 10. And so the game began, with everyone scattering across the house, stumbling over broken furniture, creeping through shadows, calling each other's names, and pretending to be spooked. But after about 10 minutes, something changed. I was hiding in one of the back rooms when I heard a loud bang from the direction of the stairs. It was the kind of sound that made everyone go silent. You could tell no one wanted to admit they were scared, but you could feel it. People started whispering to each other, asking, "What was that? And did you hear it too?" Then Jake's voice rang out from somewhere near the front door. But there was something in his voice that wasn't like him. He sounded scared. "Guys, I'm out. I'm done playing," he yelled. "This isn't funny anymore." His voice cracked in a way I'd never heard. We thought he was joking, trying to spook us. But then we heard footsteps, fast footsteps, like he was running. And then just as suddenly we heard the door slam open. I ran toward the sound, thinking he was pulling some prank, maybe planning to jump out and scare us. But as I reached the door, I caught a glimpse of him bolting into the woods that bordered the house. Jake was sprinting, looking over his shoulder, like something was chasing him. His costume, a cheap werewolf suit, looked almost surreal against the dark trees. "Jake," I yelled after him, stepping outside. But he didn't look back. He just kept running, disappearing deeper into the blackness. The others came up behind me, looking confused. "What's he doing?" someone asked, laughing nervously. But I didn't laugh. There was something wrong, something that I couldn't shake. We waited, thinking he'd come back, laughing about how he'd spooked us. But the minutes turned to an hour, and then another. By midnight, a feeling of dread had settled over all of us. We called his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. We tried shouting into the woods, our voices swallowed by the endless dark. Nothing. One by one, people started leaving, too uncomfortable to stay. Mark, a few others, and I were the only ones who stayed behind, pacing and debating if we should call the cops. Part of me still thought Jake would jump out laughing. It wasn't until dawn, when the woods were washed in the gray light, that the full weight of what had happened sank, and we reported him missing. Of course, his parents were devastated. We joined search parties, scouring the forest and the fields beyond. Days turned to weeks, and eventually the searches slowed, then stopped. People began to say things like, maybe he wanted to leave, or he's probably just hiding. But I knew Jake, he wouldn't do that, not without saying something. Months later, rumors began to spread about that forest. People said they saw things at night, a shadow darting between trees, or a figure standing on the edge, just beyond the reach of the town's lights. People called it the Halloween ghost. But I knew better. It was Jake, or at least something that looked like him. I started having nightmares in them. I'd see Jake in the woods calling for help, his voice distorted, echoing. He'd be running the trees, grabbing at him like skeletal fingers. He'd turn, look at me with eyes wide in terror, And then he'd disappear into the shadows, and every dream he'd be dressed in that ridiculous werewolf costume, frozen in time, trapped in the last memory I had of him. One night, I went back to that house against my better judgment. The place was abandoned, its windows broken, the rooms filled with dead leaves and silence. I stood at the edge of the woods, heart pounding, and called out, "Jake." The only answer was the rustling of leaves, but as I turned to leave, I felt a strange chill, and I swear I heard his voice, faint and distant, whisper, "Help me." I bolted, running faster than I ever had. I didn't stop until I was back in my car, gasping for breath, feeling like something had followed me just out of sight. To this day, no one knows what happened to Jake. The forest has taken on a life of its own. They say no one goes in there after dark. Now that sometimes if you're quiet, you can hear footsteps on the edge of town, and every Halloween, without fail, I dream of him. His face was half hidden in that ridiculous costume, frozen in terror. And maybe one day I'll go back to the woods and try to bring him home. But for now, all I have is the memory, that terrible clinging memory.